California's largest reservoir is changing faster than anyone planned for. At Shasta Lake, water levels have climbed to just 63 feet below full capacity, rising more than 1.5 feet in a single day. On the surface, that number sounds like good news. After years of drought, rising water feels like relief. But among hydrologists, engineers, and water managers, this rapid increase has triggered serious concern. This is not a slow seasonal refill driven by steady snowmelt. It is not following the historical patterns that reservoirs were designed around. What is happening at Shasta Lake is acceleration, and acceleration is where stability begins to weaken. In just over 2 weeks, the lake has risen more than 35 feet. That kind of movement usually takes months, sometimes an entire wet season. Instead, it happened in days. Storm after storm, fueled by powerful atmospheric rivers, has poured massive volumes of water into a system that was recently operating at historic lows. Veteran water experts who have tracked this basin for decades are struggling to find a comparable moment in the past. Daily gauge readings are refreshed again and again, each update showing water climbing faster than long-term planning models ever anticipated. This is not water gently returning to an empty reservoir. This is water arriving with force. The speed of the rise has changed the entire conversation. Levels that once increased gradually now jump in noticeable increments. When water moves this quickly, the risk profile shifts. Reservoirs are not only measured by how much water they can hold, but by how quickly they can adapt to change. And right now, change is happening faster than expected. Just 1 year ago, California was deep in drought. Shasta Lake sat at roughly 30% capacity. Boat ramps ended in dry dirt. Marinas shut down early. Emergency water restrictions were debated across cities and agricultural regions alike. Groundwater pumping increased as surface supplies vanished. The state was managing scarcity. Then the storms arrived. Years of drought had hardened California's soils. Dry ground compacted over time, losing its ability to absorb rainfall efficiently. When heavy rains finally returned, the land could not soak them in. Instead, water rushed across the surface, turning rain into immediate runoff. Rivers swelled rapidly, funneling water straight into reservoirs like Shasta. The shift was abrupt. California did not transition slowly from dry to wet conditions. It snapped from one extreme to the other. Systems built to conserve every drop were suddenly forced to manage excess. That flip created a new challenge. How do you safely release water without overwhelming downstream communities? Infrastructure designed to carefully store water must now decide how much to let go and how fast. Holding too much increases pressure. Releasing too quickly raises flood risks below the dam. Across the state, sensors now operate continuously. At Shasta, Oroville, and Berryessa, engineers monitor inflows around the clock. The question is no longer just how much water is coming in, but how much the surrounding land and infrastructure can handle. Dams were built for balance, predictable inflows, time to adjust. What they face now is velocity. Downstream effects are already unfolding. Rivers back up. Levees experience pressure from both sides. Floodplains that were developed for housing quietly resume their natural role as overflow zones. Roads that were regraded for drought access now sit underwater. In communities near Shasta Lake, relief has quickly turned into vigilance. Rural towns with limited resources rush to build sandbag barriers against water that was never supposed to be there. Too much water has become the new emergency, and many areas are not prepared for it. What makes this situation even more concerning is what cannot be seen. Rising shorelines and submerged docks tell only part of the story. The greater risk lies beneath the surface. As reservoirs fill rapidly, pressure builds not only against concrete walls, but within the ground itself. Water tables rise, sediment shifts. Old fault systems experience new loading stress. Geologists warn that sudden reservoir filling, especially after long droughts, can alter subsurface pressures in subtle but important ways. This does not mean earthquakes are guaranteed, but in already stressed regions, even small changes can trigger microseismic activity. Meanwhile, aging tunnels, spillways, and underground channels are pushed harder than they have been in years. Maintenance crews work constantly, inspecting for erosion, leaks, and structural fatigue. What initially looked like a miracle refill has become a daily process of watching for weakness. Because when systems fail under pressure, they rarely offer advance warning. As Shasta Lake continues to rise, attention is shifting from the surface to the systems built to control it. California's water infrastructure was designed in an era when extremes were rare and predictability ruled planning. Reservoirs, dams, and spillways were engineered around historical averages. What they're facing now exists outside those assumptions. The core challenge is not capacity alone. Shasta Dam can technically hold the water. The real issue is stress. Rapid inflow places enormous pressure on concrete structures, outlet tunnels, and spillways that were meant to manage gradual change. When water enters faster than it can be safely released, every component of the system is tested at once. Engineers monitor stress sensors embedded deep within the dam structure. These instruments measure minute movements that are invisible to the eye. Under normal conditions, changes are slow and stable. During rapid filling events, readings fluctuate more sharply. Decisions that once took weeks are now made in hours. Spillway management becomes a delicate balancing act. Releasing too little water increases pressure on the dam itself. Releasing too much sends powerful surges downstream, threatening communities that may already be saturated from rainfall. There is no perfect choice, only risk management. This pressure does not stop at the dam. Downstream rivers are absorbing water at a pace they were not designed for. Channels widen, banks erode. Sediment that has remained undisturbed for decades is suddenly mobilized. Each release from the reservoir compounds conditions already shaped by heavy rainfall. Levees experience stress for both sides. Water pushes outward from swollen rivers, while saturated ground weakens structural support from below. Flood control systems that rely on gravity and flow timing struggle when water arrives simultaneously from multiple sources. In some areas, floodplains that have been developed over decades are quietly reverting to their natural purpose. Roads become channels. Fields turn into temporary lakes. Communities that have not faced flooding in generations now confront it directly. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is how quickly conditions can change. A single storm upstream can alter inflow rates within hours. Reservoir operators must anticipate not only current conditions, but what may arrive next. Forecasting becomes more uncertain when storm systems stack back to back. Past failures remain fresh in memory. At Lake Oroville, the spillway crisis of previous years reshaped how engineers think about risk. Since then, systems have been reinforced, protocols updated, and monitoring expanded. Yet even upgraded infrastructure has limits. At Lake Berryessa, the site of the spillway, flowing draws attention and concern. These systems were designed as emergency outlets, not routine features. When emergency pathways become regular occurrences, it signals that the system is operating near its upper threshold. Across California, operators face impossible trade-offs: hold water back and increase structural stress, or release it and raise flood risks downstream. Every decision affects lives, property, and long-term stability. Compounding the problem is age. Much of California's water infrastructure was built decades ago. Materials degrade. Designs reflect the climate assumptions of the past. What once represented engineering excellence is now being pushed beyond its original intent. Maintenance crews work around the clock. Inspections are constant. Even small signs of erosion or seepage are treated seriously. Under rapid pressure, minor weaknesses can escalate quickly. What is becoming clear is that this is not a temporary anomaly. The systems are not failing because they are poorly built. They are being asked to function in conditions they were never meant to endure. And as pressure builds on the visible structures, another threat continues to grow quietly beneath the surface. While rising water levels and stressed infrastructure dominate public attention, scientists are increasingly focused on what cannot be seen. Beneath Shasta Lake and the surrounding landscape, a complex system of rock layers, sediment, and faults is responding to the rapid weight of incoming water. When a reservoir fills slowly, the ground has time to adjust. Pressure distributes gradually through rock and soil. When filling happens rapidly, that balance is disrupted. The sheer mass of water adds millions of tons of weight in a short span of time. This loading effect alters subsurface pressure in ways that are difficult to predict. Water seeps downward through fractures and porous layers, increasing pore pressure deep underground. As pressure rises, it can reduce friction along existing faults. This does not guarantee earthquakes, but it can make the ground more sensitive to movement. Seismologists refer to this as reservoir-induced seismicity. Most of the activity is too small to be felt. Microseismic events register only on instruments. However, clusters of these signals provide valuable information. They reveal how stress is migrating through the subsurface and where weaknesses may exist. What concerns researchers is the speed at which these changes are occurring. After long drought periods, the ground beneath California's reservoirs is often compacted and dry. When water returns suddenly, it does not simply refill empty spaces. It forces its way into fractures that have not carried water in years. This can lead to uneven pressure distribution. Geological surveys around Shasta Lake show layers of volcanic rock, sedimentary deposits, and ancient fault structures. Many of these features formed millions of years ago and have remained stable under predictable conditions. Rapid loading challenges that stability. Sensors placed around the region monitor ground movement down to the millimeter. In some locations, subtle uplift and subsidence patterns have already been detected. These shifts are not dangerous on their own, but they signal that the system is adjusting. Another concern lies in sediment movement. As water levels rise, submerged slopes experience increased pressure. Sediment that once rested safely may begin to creep. Over time, this can affect reservoir capacity and strain underwater structures. Engineers must account for these changes when planning releases. Altered sediment patterns can affect intake structures, outlet tunnels, and spillway flow behavior. What worked last year may behave differently now. There is also the issue of aging materials beneath the waterline. Concrete, steel, and rock interfaces are exposed to conditions they have not experienced in decades. Increased moisture accelerates chemical reactions that weaken materials over time. None of this means that failure is imminent. What it does mean is that uncertainty has increased. Systems that once operated within narrow margins are now navigating wider swings. Scientists emphasize that these processes are slow and complex. The danger does not come from a single dramatic event, but from cumulative stress. Small changes layered on top of each other over time can lead to sudden outcomes. This is why monitoring has intensified. Data from satellites, ground sensors, and seismic stations are being integrated into real-time models. The goal is to detect patterns before they escalate into emergencies. Shasta Lake's rapid rise is forcing experts to rethink how reservoirs interact with geology. Water is not just a resource or a hazard. It is a force capable of reshaping the ground itself. As attention remains fixed on the surface, the most important changes may be unfolding far below, silently altering the balance that holds everything in place.